Hi there, this is Billie Tarascio with the Modern Divorce Podcast, joined again by one of my favorite Texas lawyers. It's Brian Walters. Brian, welcome to the show.
Great, it's good to be back.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. And today we're going to talk about the Bill Gates divorce.
It was one of the biggest of all time as far as wealth goes, for sure.
Absolutely, and certainly the biggest in 2021. It just became finalized in August. Why don't you give people who don't know just a little bit of background?
Yeah, so I mean, I think even though it was in a different year, it'll always be somewhat tied in with the Jeff Bezos divorce, just because they're both from Seattle. It was around the same time period. Their marriages were fairly similar length, that kind of thing. Fairly, two of the wealthiest families in the history of this country, for sure. But yeah, they had been married a long time. I think they met at work, had a child or two that had grown, and it was, from what came out later, it seemed to have been a marriage that had been coming apart for a long time. And then about 2 years ago, there was real specific a decision to get divorced, but to quietly negotiate an exit. And evidently that took about 2 years to negotiate. It was a little bit different than the Bezos one in the sense that most of the Bezos's wealth was tied up in Amazon. He had a few other assets, Washington Post, Blue Horizon, some land, and he's actually the largest landowner in Texas, interestingly. And where Gates had been out of running Microsoft for a long time, and so a lot of his fortune was not in Microsoft, it was in all kinds of different things. I read this week that, for example, he finalized the purchase of the Four Seasons hotels, for example. So I guess it was more complex, and but yeah, I think they'll always be a compare and contrast it to each other to some extent because of their similarities and differences.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned is that the Gates divorce took about 2 years from when Melinda started the divorce versus the Bezos divorce, which went much quicker. And that, of course, was Jeff. And the circumstances of the divorce matter. Jeff was madly in love with somebody else,
Right.
madly in love, publicly out there, could not contain the situation that he was experiencing with his new love. And that was not the case with Gates. In fact, Gates came out later and said, that it was a great tragedy, that he really considered this a loss, even though he came out and, they did the public face, but he didn't want to get divorced. And so often, I think you and I see this happen with women, where women kind of see it coming a lot farther in advance, usually, than men.
Yeah, I mean, I depending on the stats you read, it's somewhere between, I think, 2/3 and 3/4 of all divorces are initiated by women, and whether that's because they see it coming or they're more realistic or whatever it is, that seems to be the case. I agree with you, and so this was the Gates one was fairly common in that sense, is that he seemed to be willing to continue forward with it in whatever form that took. Obviously, there were a lot of undercurrents, and based on all the leaks that came out afterwards, there had been problems for a real long time. All the leaks seemed to be negatively toward Bill Gates, so that would probably indicate where the leaks came from, which would not be Bill Gates. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, it's interesting. I'm sure you've read what I've read, that he used to have a much worse reputation, and over the last 20 years worked very hard with this foundation and with all the philanthropy to really make his reputation quite positive. And it was quite positive up until we started, things started coming out that were not part of a carefully crafted image. Melinda apparently began looking at divorce after finding out about the extent of Bill's relationship with Epstein.
Right. That's, yeah, which is, that information could have only come from one source.
Right, absolutely. I mean, who would have known that?
Which is,
Yeah,
I don't know. And maybe I'm a little cynical because I'm a divorce lawyer, but that's a convenient story in 2021 is what I'll
sure.
say about that. It might be true. It might not be, but it's a convenient story. I'll put it that way. A
Well,
convenient truth.
in the same article that Bill said, I really, or in the same interview where he said that this is a great tragedy. This is not something that I'm happy about. This is a loss. He also at the same time said, and it was a very bad idea for me to be friends with Epstein. Like I read that wrong.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's so much easier now to look back and be like, that was obviously the stupidest decision ever. Writings on the wall. And from what's come out, it seems to me that she was probably dissatisfied with their marriage for a long time. And he was like, this is good enough. What are you complaining
Right.
about?
Right. Right.
You have
Yeah.
everything you could
Exactly.
possibly want.
He had come to terms with what it was, and she wasn't satisfied. Exactly. That's a common dynamic. We see
It's
that
a
all the time, and
common
people.
dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. They just, most people have, almost everybody has less zeros in their net worth, and neither one of us are Washington state lawyers, but from a financial perspective, they were both as similar in the sense that the main asset, which was either the Amazon or the Microsoft ownership, were started before the marriage by the husbands, and then they got married, and that had for whatever reason, it seems like for the Bezoses, they were, their main asset by far was their 16% of the Amazon stock, which the wife in that case, Mackenzie, got I think 4%, and he got 12%. With the Gates, I understand it was considerably closer to an even division of property for whatever reason. I don't know if that's because there was someone took a harder line or what. I'm not sure.
That is interesting, because what I had read was that Amazon was started during the marriage, that they drove cross country together from New York. And
actually, I think that you're right. But I think that the way it was structured, maybe I didn't state that too well, was that he was the owner of it, or something like that. I'm not 100% sure, although I suspect that for most people, 4% of Amazon would be enough to probably enough to live on.
right, I really felt like she left money on the table,
Yeah.
Especially because of the fact that, based on my understanding, it was started during the marriage, and he wanted out so badly.
Right.
He would have
Right.
done anything to not be married, and that's just where he was at emotionally.
Yeah.
But I think for her, it was like, enough is enough. She's now with a school teacher, remarried, happy, giving away money. Like, I think it worked out for them. And Melinda may have been a little bit of a better negotiator.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like too, and that's a good point. I mean, you have leverage, and when you're getting divorced, if someone really wants out quickly, then they give up leverage, and they will probably pay more to be done with things quicker. That'd be my guess about it. So.
Right. But in these cases, okay, so what's interesting with Gates is there is no money judgment. There is no spousal maintenance. Everything is private. And that's true with Jeff and Mackenzie as well. We don't know all the details. We only know the details of what happened publicly in the publicly traded companies. Other than that, it's completely private. They probably work together with a mediator,
Right.
private mediator, and their lawyers to negotiate it out over time. Now, what is the wisdom in handling your divorce that way?
Well, number one, just like you said, it's private. I mean, people don't realize this till the end of things usually, but generally, and it depends on the state, but generally, if you just file your divorce, it frequently lists the value of your assets, what the assets are, account numbers, or part of account numbers, which if somebody's looking to cause a problem, I mean, who wants their financial information out there like that? And not anybody that I can think of. So keeping it quiet and private like that makes a lot of sense. And it's also a way to keep the conflict down. which is, I think, especially important if you have kids together, even if they're grown kids, but even if not, it's a searing, emotionally scarring event to get divorced under this best of circumstances. And so trying to keep the conflict down makes a ton of sense if you can do it. I mean, it takes two people willing to do that. It takes two people willing to be fair and open and reasonable, and that isn't always the situation. So
yeah. Now in Texas where you practice, misconduct is a factor.
It is. I think that's becoming less and less an issue in a lot of different states, and probably even less of an issue here. But if somebody runs off and has an affair, that can be considered and probably will be considered in how the property is divided. Not to mention how the kid issues might be resolved.
Really?
So yeah, and I know this, like the California and Arizona and other lawyers are like, what are you talking about? Who cares? Your marriage broke. Who cares why? And we still call balls and strikes and say who's good and bad. And I certainly understand the other way around, and it would be easier and simpler if it was just, well, your marriage didn't work out. Who cares? Who cares what happened? But we're still that way, at least for now.
Well, I remember us talking about the financial aspect, and I remember you telling me that spousal maintenance is essentially not an issue, but if you prove misconduct, you're going to have an unequal distribution of property, which is crazy. But I don't remember us talking about how it can actually affect your parenting time as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a question of, and when I had this recently in a couple of cases, without mentioning any names, but I mean, if there's another person in their marriage or a relationship, an affair or something like that, and they get kind of brought in front of the kids and put in the middle of the parenting situation too early or inappropriately, or they have problems or issues, that's a serious problem in most judges' eyes. That we're not going to replace dad with a new dad or mom with a new mom or anything like that, or we don't want anything inappropriate going on, and there's a lot of variations on that. So those things can make differences here, and significant ones. And then I can think of a recent case I was involved in where I think the new person in the marriage, who's outside of the marriage, obviously, was really a fundamental factor in the custody decision. And
Wow.
it and you could kind of see why. I mean, you could see how it was causing problems with the kids, and they were very uncomfortable. And the parent who's bringing in the new person really was just so happy to have a new person that they really liked, that they just kind of put that ahead of their parenting responsibilities. And the judge thought, well, that's not putting the best interest of your kids first, and acted accordingly. So how about you guys? Do you have that ever come up with y'all, or is it just kind of the way it rolls?
I think we're more Wild West than you are. Like we're more like anti-government. Like the court doesn't want anything to do with anybody's personal decisions at all. So it's so different. Like you can basically introduce as many boyfriends and girlfriends as you want without consequence.
Wow. Okay.
And
yeah, that's a big no-no here.
For a 50-50 split. So do you have that too? Do you have a presumption of equal parenting time?
We don't, although which is a whole nother discussion. They're trying, I think they're trying to get there. In fact, the legislature just passed some amendments to the presumptive parenting schedule that you're talking about that made it 46-54. So it's as close as you can get. They're trying to keep the kids in one house like Monday through Thursday during the school week, and then the rest of the time pretty much with the other parent. And so, but it's gotten so complicated that it's almost kind of like, what's the point? And the problem in our state that remains unaddressed is that the child support is all or nothing. So it's the 54% parent who gets the full amount of child support, even though they have 54% they get 25% of your income or whatever, for 2 kids or whatever the number is. And it just doesn't matter. Even if you did a 50, that's our problem. That drives so much litigation. I want custody. Well, you're going to get 46% anyway, right? Like you're both working. Like who can even use 46% of their time if you have a job? You can't.
Right.
So, well, because I don't want to pay 25% of my income to the other side,
Wow.
which kind of makes sense, like, heck, I have the kids basically half the time and I'm paying all this money. It's kind of like a lawyer full employment program here for Texas. Because I think most states, I'm familiar a lot with California, but you guys maybe there's something similar where they weigh the amount of time with each
Yeah.
parent and they weigh the relative
Yeah.
incomes, and they kind of, it's, if they make about the same and they have about the same amount of time, there's little or no child support. Here,
Right.
it's, all or nothing. That extra 2 days a month or 1 day a month, it's probably 1 day a month now, is a huge difference, and it drives so much litigation, so much conflict, and so much hard feelings. So
Yeah, that seems really, really backwards. Like, why would you
yeah,
not account for parenting time? I mean, obviously
I,
you didn't make the law, but
right. I understand why it started out that way. I understand the theory behind it, but it's, things have really changed. And there was a time, 50, 60 years ago when parents would get divorced 40 years ago, and the dad would often kind of go his own way and
right,
maybe see the kids a couple times a year. That was real common. And it
right,
wasn't because they loved their kids any less. It was just kind of the way things were. And that's not the way it is anymore. Most dad or non-custodial parents, whatever you want it is, are pretty involved most of the time. A lot of them are very, very involved.
yeah.
So and I think the work from home thing that's so common now has made that even more the case. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a quirky thing. So
It is a quirky thing, you and your Texas laws. So, okay,
right.
since the timing of this all, I need to ask, are things crazy over there because of the new abortion law? Has that affected your practice at all? Are you
I
getting anything?
I haven't I haven't seen that much, and I think it's one of those kind of national stories that probably has more national media attention than actual affecting anybody's lives. I don't think anybody's mentioned it in my life or in my office since it happened, and
Mhm.
and it's I don't know, and I'm not sure how it would affect family law that much directly. I guess in theory it would, right? Because there might be more kids, but um, but not nothing on the practical end of things on
Mhm.
my practice, at least
Mhm.
yet.
Okay, back to Gates. One final thing I want to talk about. So they have decided to continue operating the foundation together with
Mhm.
an agreement that after 2 years, if it's not working or either of them doesn't want to continue working together, then Melinda will leave and she will be bought out by Gates.
Mhm.
How often do you see that happen in your divorce cases where people are running a business together and they may want to continue to do so?
Um, Not that often, just because it's, first of all, there really aren't that many businesses that both spouses are still involved in, and it's the foundation, right? So it's a little bit different. But um, I think that's actually a harder way to have a marriage, in my opinion, is to run a business or something else together. To me, it's just another source of conflict waiting to happen, although it can be a strength. I could see people who that's what they really love to do, both of them, as and that's actually adds to their marriage, versus, and the foundation might be a good example of that. And I think I do get approached when those cases happen with a lot of people who say, yeah, we'd like to do that. And then we start talking and thinking through, what would that really look like? Like, what happens when, your husband starts bringing his new girlfriend to to the office lunches, and how's that going to be? Or what if you have a new kid and, now you have, the plan was to give the business to the 2 kids that you do have, but then your husband remarries and has a kid. Now, where does that third kid come into things. And the more you start thinking about those things, the more you start deciding that's maybe not such a great plan. I think that's a smart way for the Gates to do it. Let's try it for a couple of years, and if not, there's an easy solution, to buy somebody out. In a lot of situations, that's a risk. Hey, we don't know in 2 years or 5 years if we're going to have the money to buy you out. I think with the foundation, the money's already there, right? So you would just simply kind of divide it out and not have a big deal about it. But I didn't know, but that specific provision, that's an interesting one. And it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. And that gives them kind of 2 years to kind of cool down and move on with their lives. And yeah, maybe they'll decide that's the one thing they really like to still do together is run that foundation. Who knows?
Yeah, I've seen this come up in a couple of ways. Never in the cases that I've had with businesses where people have actually gone on to operate it together. I've had a lot of people who start at the beginning of their divorce talk about that. I run the books, he runs the operations or whatnot. And in my experience, it has never ever worked that even by the time they get divorced, they still want to work together. But I have had several cases, like a good handful, where somebody will stay in the house. Maybe it was owned by my client, the husband, before they got married, and now he wants to continue to let the wife stay in the house with the kids until a certain date. And then what we do is we put in sort of similar provisions where you can sell at this point, with this much notice, or you want to continue. I have another couple who continues to own an investment property together in Mexico, and they have divvied up the weeks so that she has a certain number of weeks she can take for vacation each year. He has a certain number, and then they split the profits. So, I mean, in those several cases, it has worked. Those are more passive versus active businesses. And I think with the foundation, it's got something like 1,600 employees. So it's not like they have to go to work every day and see each other and be in the same building.
Right.
So, it's got to be highly fact specific, but it is interesting, when you have a couple that has grown some sort of investment opportunity together and they're not quite ready to sell. And a lot of people don't want to sell their houses right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a great market, and you don't know where things are going to go. Yeah, that's a good point. Probably down at some point. Or call me a pessimist, but I remember 2009.
Yeah. So are you finding our housing prices crazy there?
Yeah. Austin in particular has been just absolutely insane. We get a ton of California relocation people, transplants to Austin. That seems to be their favorite place to go. And they just can't believe it. They're like, wait, I'm moving from Palo Alto to Austin. I can get 3 times the house for half the price. Here's all cash. So the poor Austin people. Well, if you own a house in Austin, it's been great. But if you're trying to buy in, if you're a young professional or a young couple or something like that, it's tricky. So we'll see what happens. How about you guys there in Arizona?
Yeah, pretty crazy. Lots of people coming in from Washington and California, and so we'll just have to see, now with the eviction moratorium, one of the questions and one of the things we're talking about with a lot of clients is when to do that appraisal. Are they going up? Are they going down? And, timing the markets never really worked for anybody.
Yeah. Everybody thinks they can do it, and you really can't. Or you get lucky if you do. So for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Brian. As always,
you bet.
It's been fabulous, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. You have a good weekend.
Bye.
All right. Bye.